Y'all know what time it is? It is 6 o'clock Eastern on a Sunday evening. It is the best time of the week. We are back. Aquarian Anarchy. We got José, Alberto, Niño in the house. We're coming right back at you. Stay tuned. Our quote for tonight is from Ludwig von Mises. Every socialist is a disguised dictator. I mean, I don't know how to argue with that. I don't even want to see if anybody can come up with an argument against that. Let me get this damn thing out the way. There we go. All right, we're back. Welcome, everybody, to Aquarian Anarchy. I am Chad. You see Marcus and Nicco down below. And with us, we have tonight a very special guest. Friend of mine I've known for about 3 years now, José. And met him through Hotep Nation, and then also like running in like Mises circles and everything. José, it's a pleasure to have you on. How you been, man?
No, I've been great. Thank you so much for having me on, Chad, and it's great to meet you guys, Marcus and Nicco.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
glad to meet you, man.
So let's just get right into the hot topics, because you wrote a couple of books. You wrote this one, How Socialism Destroyed Venezuela. And but you also wrote this one, which is really, because we're starting to see something like this go on in another area of the world right now, where there's some intervention and some meddling and all this other stuff. We're not going to get into that because we'd like to keep our channel. We might dig into it a little later with some code language. But this one right here, the 10 myths of gun control. This one we're on rinse and repeat, right? We just had another little episode this past week, where the war drums have been banging again on what the solution to either, whether it's crazy people doing crazy people stuff, or maybe some people being activated to do some stuff for the powers that be. You know what I mean? There's some shady stuff going on, but it always seems to, you'll hear about, I don't know, 5 or 6 of these myths thrown out there. The one about mental illness being one of them, those safe zones, and all the different gun control measures and everything. What do you start to see when something like this starts to happen? What are the kind of the patterns that you start to recognize with how this is reported and how people start to respond to it?
Yeah, there's always a similar kind of shtick that goes down after all these shootings, where demagogue politicians try to exploit them and just call for all manner of gun control, whether it's bans on guns, tightened background checks, red flag gun confiscation orders. And now you're hearing people talk about like censoring like the internet, and also creating these like domestic terror agencies to monitor so-called acts of domestic terror. And this is the typical pattern that you see whenever there's a moment of crisis or perceived crisis, where the political establishment uses crisis to justify more power grabs on people's liberties. And that's the nature of the beast. Whether you have a mass shooting or a broader like terrorist attack that kills like hundreds, if not thousands of people, this is the way the state operates. And what we saw like in Buffalo is like really no exception. Though it is kind of curious in this case, they've killed multiple birds, one stone, by not only going after like the typical like gun rights, and also like the domestic terror canard, but also they're going after your everyday like Trump supporter by talking about like the Great Replacement, and that they're really just going after people who are advocating for immigration restriction by connecting this guy who apparently was posting stuff about the Great Replacement. And yeah, there's a lot of questions to be asked, because you mentioned one point about how this guy could have been potentially radicalized, because when on the internet, you do see a lot of cases in these forums where they are like infiltrated, and they sometimes have like legitimate like federal agents there that are trying to radicalize people and lead them on to do crazy stuff. So there's like a lot of questions that have to be asked, but the media won't let us ask that. But the natural instinct for the media is to just find some way to justify a power grab that infringes on our civil liberties.
Yeah, and isn't so like entrapment is a thing, right? Like and you have different things with raids and setting aside whether there should be a war on drugs in the first place, but in the war on drugs, there are a few approaches that are taken with that, right? Where you have you know, intel gathering and things like that, where you just monitor different activities, or you see people. Oh, Nicco bounced.
He'll be back.
Yeah, he'll be back. But what can happen from time to time is there can be something set up where someone actually poses as a dealer or as a purchaser and sets something, and they have to be really, really careful, because if entrapment is used where they're actually initiating a crime and then inviting someone into where they feel like they're kind of like in a rock and a hard place, it gets difficult. This is a whole different ball game when you're talking about people going online and like coaxing people and they talked about Trump and January 6th and inciting something. Like you have people, federal agents, actually go in on, like you said, on some of these forums, and ginning people up to actually go out and harm people, and then using that as a way to further infringe on liberty. But let's start just at the very beginning. The infringement on liberty is a huge, is the rest of the iceberg, so to speak. Whereas this other, but that tip of that iceberg is a pretty big, horrible deal when you think about the fact that you might have someone actually going and telling someone go to the mall and murder a bunch of people.
Right.
And if they do it, well, nope, sorry, it was on them. Well, but you're actively trying to get them to do that. The same kind of shit that they're trying to tar and feather Trump and anybody else for on. But then Lori Lightfoot can go say we're going to take up arms about the Roe v. Wade thing.
Right. Yeah. Anymore, it's not a question, in my opinion, of how, whether the FBI is involved in any particular domestic shooting or domestic terrorist activity. It's how many FBI agents are involved. There is almost always somebody. Would you agree with that, Jose?
Yeah, I haven't really looked into the specifics about this case, but there is a warranted degree of like cynicism about the nature of like federal law enforcement and their involvement in all these cases, because they often advance very convenient agendas as well, because you have to look at like cui bono after these incidents, and that, it's like a self-licking ice cream cone for a lot of these people. And I do think that we that there's a really good point that Chad mentioned as well, that there is a really interesting friend-enemy distinction in how like the state operates, where a notable figure like ostensibly like on the left or even like the approved right could make some so-called like inflammatory remarks that would be considered like so-called incitement. I have a problem with that term to begin with, but then they just go free. But then like Trump just says peacefully protest at this event that gets infiltrated, and then go crazy, and then all of a sudden you have wall-to-wall coverage of January 6th being some like coup, worst attack since 9/11 or like Pearl Harbor. But it shows that that like the managerial left, the cultural left, like they're the ones who kind of call the shots, and they ultimately are the ones who like dictate a lot of the course of like the debate. And if you're on that side, you can almost get away with like crazy stuff that would get you arrested in most states. But if you're like on the right and you kind of push the envelope a bit, you are kind of screwed. And that's why also for a lot of people that are involved in a lot of this online culture and these groups, they have to always be on their toes, because their groups could potentially get infiltrated, and make sure to vet people and that they're like legit, because you don't want to be caught up in some of these cases where you could have tons of people get arrested, as we've seen with January 6th, which has like over 500 people or so that have been arrested, and several hundred like languishing in horrible prison standards. So yeah, this stuff, it's getting pretty serious these days, and the stakes are getting higher. And I do agree with like Marcus that some of this stuff now, I would venture to say, is involving like multiple like agents, because these type of operations to nab a bunch of people, like say like for like January 6th, it requires like a lot.
Yeah,
for sure.
And there's video evidence of like got somebody say we need to go in there. And it's like bro, like how obvious does it have to be? And then the Gretchen Whitmer thing, same thing, where they had it was like almost all federal agents, like the whole damn thing was federal agents. Like
they got a couple morons walking
around
going,
wait, you too? Oh shit, you too? Like they're like finding out, they're like arresting each other and shit. Like, hang on, I'm undercover. Like, wait, so am I? Like
a Spider-Man beam.
Right.
Exactly.
I do have to do a little bit of pushback though, because as much as I do think that it is worse, and I'm not one of these people that say that Trump is awful as Biden is. That is obviously not true. Trump was obviously not as bad as Biden. But, I don't know how anybody can say that. But Trump did say he could shoot somebody in the face in, what was it, Times Square, and get away with it. Yeah. He said that. And the media let him say that. And he did get away with it. So I do have to give a little bit of pushback. Where I think the divide really isn't left or right, it's totalitarianism versus libertarianism. And when the agenda moves towards totalitarianism of whatever flavor it is, which means pulling away guns, because I hate to tell some of these MAGA wearing lunatics that think that he was going to save their life, that he was going to take their guns.
The guy who said we should take the guns first and do due process later. That guy,
right. I do think that there is there is a difference, but the problem that I do think that they set up with these kinds of differences is that they say, okay, you can take away some bump stocks, or you can take away an AR-15, which is your choice.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're offering.
Yeah, and we talked about that in Brooklyn back in early 2019, where that was when the bump stock ban had just come out, and we were talking about how like it's you had people even on the right who were like, yeah, but you don't need a bump stock. Bump stock's stupid. It's like, it doesn't matter. Like, the point is the principle of setting the precedent of now you can start making it to where, like we talked about, like, depending on who's firing the gun, their trigger finger could be a modification of some sort, because they're better and faster than anybody else.
One thing to add as well that was particularly bad about the bump stock ban is that it was also done in like a bureaucratic manner. And one of my big themes in terms of like my overall political project is to dismantle the administrative state and the unaccountable bureaucracy, because with a bad gun control law, at least in theory, you could connect the passage of that bad legislation to the politicians that voted for it and vote them out, and at least make their lives miserable, and put pressure on them. But when you ban a bump stock through like ATF, like fiat, good luck trying to fire like the 1,000 or so agents there, or let alone abolish that agency so easily. And when you have like that, like really that kind of power concentrated in an agency like that, it's just only going to create worse precedents and really concentrate more power in DC as opposed to politicians that ostensibly represent you. And that's one thing I did take Trump to task for. And I told like a lot of people on the right, this is not a good compromise to be making whatsoever. And you're doing it like in like the worst fashion too, by giving the so-called deep state that you guys harp on about like more power, basically.
Well, so what do you think to dig into that? Because a lot of what we try to do here is like to find at least pathways to solutions, if not solutions themselves. Is there hope? Is there a way to actually to undo? Because a lot of these the people you're talking about, this bureaucratic state, the deep state that is behind the scenes and all this stuff, staffs that are, I don't know, 25 to 250 to 1 per voted in representative. Maybe even more than that. In some cases, they have staffs even bigger than that. But you have this massive bloated bureaucracy that those people are entrenched. They're there forever.
Yeah.
They're almost impossible to get rid of. Is there even hope to deal with that, or are we just kind of stuck with this and hooked up and build independent of that and try to render it obsolete as much as you can? Or what would be the approach if there is one?
Well, I read about this a lot, and I think there is a way out of this, and we have seen a model that has been quite successful. For example, at the state and local level, and I'll go with like state first, with constitutional carry for perspective. In 2009, when Barack Obama just came into office, there were only 2 constitutional carry states, Alaska and Vermont. Now we have 25 states and potentially more as of 2022. And a lot of the gun rights crowd has picked up over the years that where they're going to have like the most impact is at their state legislatures and to try to look for more decentralized alternatives. Now we're also beginning to see the emergence of these sanctuary counties and other types of cities when it comes to Second Amendment sanctuaries, where a lot of municipalities and other local bodies are just beginning to ignore state level and even federal level gun control. And I believe that's probably like the future of where this is going to lie, where certain states and counties just start ignoring federal gun control regulations. To me, decentralization of that nature is the way out, because I've been involved in a lot of federal politics and all that, and it's insanely expensive. There's tons of inertia, and the people that are your champions initially will probably end up selling you out. Like, very few exceptions are there, like say like Thomas Massey, but like for every Thomas Massey you get like just some 10 generic Republicans that go along to get along, and
or more, 50 of them.
Yeah,
a lot.
And to me, the solution lies mostly like state level and like local level politics. And I do think that people probably need to look at the successes of the constitutional carry movement and apply that to like the budding nullification movement, so that people just start ignoring the federal government. Because I will say this, that as like the ATF and these bureaucratic agencies start consolidating more power, and because of like the polarization in Congress, where it's becoming harder for the parties like to pass like official laws, and then they just go to the bureaucracy instead, that's going to create more of a legitimacy crisis among a lot of the population, and a lot of people will be more apt to rebel through like nullification and other like state level measures. Because I do believe that this is not just exclusive to Second Amendment stuff, but you see this also with like abortion and a host of other issues where polarization is forcing people to kind of go like more local and like state level of their politics. And that's kind of where the future is going for the US, in my view.
I would agree that that localization is certainly one of the best methods I've heard of. Both Chad and I worked for Adam Kokesh, and that was the keystone of his run for president. And so of course I agree with that. Where I would worry is I have seen, like with the disease that shall not be named, what happened with that, people will say, well, your governor shut that down. I watched this. I watched it happen. What they did was they brought all of the governors. I live in Indiana. They brought all of the governors in at least in my region. They brought all of them into a room and had a federal meeting. I watched. I knew that it was happening. And then they came out and locked all the states down. And then when there was no reason to lock people down, and it was proven that that was negative, not only to the economy, but to mental health and 10,000 other reasons, you hear people say, oh no, that wasn't Trump. That was the governor or whatever. No, they were just following orders. So what do you think stops that from happening. Though I like where you're going with that. I think our solution to all of this shit is to just make the government irrelevant. And, when they tell you to do something, laugh at them and keep doing what the fuck you're going to do. But how do we solve the issue of power that the federal government does through money on the states in that situation?
Yeah, I think there is people will have to kind of rewire their thinking of not just viewing only as like state versus federal government. There's going to be cases where you'll see county versus state government, and sometimes county versus federal government, and then
we're in that right now in Louisiana.
County.
Yeah.
So I tell people a lot of times that if they can't be successful in like their federal government, like federal activism or whatever, they should probably go to state activism, or if they can't do that, try county. And from my experience doing a lot of Second Amendment lobbying, a lot of like the strategies I've picked up on help a lot, whether you're doing work in the city council, county commission, state government, or even federal government. But I've become more averse to the federal government. But yeah, people ultimately, for bringing about decentralization, it will require people to be much more involved in their local affairs and pay attention to what's going on. Because one thing about this whole pandemic was that it did force people to recognize that a lot of like really bad policies are set at like the local level. And in fact, a lot of the really crappy politicians that you see at a state legislature or federal office generally get started as bad politicians in the local level, and you can stop them there, or their networks are very much entrenched at the local level. And I think that's where most people from like any type of like dissident movement, whether it's like a libertarian, paleoconservative, right-wing populist, is going to have probably the easiest chance to have an impact is probably locally, because of the fact of not just proximity, but also barriers to entry and all that. Because like, just for example, like in a congressional race, like at the federal level, you're probably going to be having to spend like easily 7 or even 8 figures, depending on the type of like district and media market you're in. And that prices out like a lot of people, and you're gonna have to get like either be rich or be beholden to really nasty special interest groups and all that. So yeah, people will have to get creative, because there's some state governments that are just awful. Like that's just straight up. So you'll have to go down to like a lower level, and it kind of creates a form of like the goal is kind of creating certain types of like freedom sanctuaries and carving out these areas where people of like-minded people can operate in and start taking back territory that the managerial state has taken from us effectively, and just go from there. But yeah, like I kind of stress that that people have to like think beyond like electoral cycles, and think more in terms of identifying particular issues that are very relevant in your community, and finding like-minded individuals and build organizations that are not only like that are built to last more than just like for more than multiple cycles, but be like multi-generational in nature, and pass it on to like other leaders and stuff like that. Because the typical voting game, like that's been played out. We've already seen it. It has not worked well, and people have to like kind of like think beyond that. And I think there's a lot of opportunities with like the successes of several like Second Amendment movement stuff, and also now with a lot of people starting to exit the government schooling system. There's opportunities there, but it's just a matter of people channeling their energy in more productive ventures.
So what do you impose that communities do, and like including your community, to initially start building and being a better community? Yes, it's like you can be a part of it, like, hey, try and get your neighbors, but like, what could you do specifically to like start that fire?
I'd say like you probably want to do like intel of like read like local newspapers, or even like attend like a lot of these city council meetings to understand what are like the big issues in the area you're in, so that you're not like politically tone deaf, because you don't want to bring like your pet issue that's like not really relevant. And it's probably easier to be like much more active in whether it's like a party meeting or even like a basic like organization like civil society, like Lions Club or whatever church, to figure out what people are talking about there and see if you can find like-minded individuals. You go to like even like basic party meetings from like Democrats to Republicans to see if you can all align on single issues. My thing is single issue lobbying. That's been how I got into like a lot of like political operations, and I tend to focus more on issues more so than typical like partisan activity or like the cult of personalities of candidates. So it does require you to probably be more active, like at meetup groups and just meeting other people, finding out who are like power brokers in your area and going from there. And it's also just much easier, in my opinion, why going back to the single issues, to find like an issue to organize people. Because when you have like a multi-issue organization, it's going to obviously create a lot of tension because everybody won't be on the same page. Whereas a single issue type of coalition is just much easier to organize, in my view.
Sure, and I think you have an advantage with gun issues, because I think ultimately Americans tend to be more in favor of some kind of freedom as it involves firearms than most countries. I think that we have that advantage in this country in that regard, but that isn't always true of every issue. And what to kind of try to move a little bit away from the gun issue, not that I don't care to come back to it, but what other than 2A issues, what other issues are kind of core to your heart? What matters to you?
For me, I'm big on largely like education, freedom of just trying to downsize like government schooling, and also going back to a much more restrained, non-interventionist foreign policy and monetary issues as well, of just like ending the Fed. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the wars in the Fed, start there and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome.
but also I think that education thing is like, I don't know that there's anything more important, to be honest, because like that's
Sure.
if you want to look at where like the the whole like zeitgeist is formed, it's there.
Yeah, big time.
For
That's
sure.
a multi-generational project too.
Yeah, no,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what it does, what education does is it because I'm an anarchist. I don't believe that any of this voting crap's ever going to work. But not that I think that it's completely pointless. I think if you, like you said, you can build coalitions, you can get involved in your politics and make, and Thomas Massey has certainly made some inroads, but turning over this leaf to a really free country, that's not going to happen at the ballot box. But by educating people and getting people aware of what the fuck is going on, that has a outside of voting and all of that crap, that gets that mindset moving towards something else better. So I agree with you that education, because like Rothbard said, if people would realize what the government is, we would, that's all we need to turn, get people to turn around. Because if they realize what it is, then they'll be like, oh hell, I don't want anything to do with that. So.
Yeah, but it's also the way that you, like, some of this stuff with these entrenched bureaucracies and all this other stuff, all this backroom dealing and everything, the more and more you cultivate people who are
with those like mindsets,
who are not going to be that type of maniacal authoritarian, then you increase your odds of, as long as those things exist, them being more populated with people who aren't going to be, take all these little, underhanded deals and everything.
Right. And because what we, even in the political realm, if you can educate people to get them, I'm not talking about get them to being, you know, a Rothbard reading or a Mises reading or a Emma Goldman reading anarchist. I'm not talking about those people. Just to stop the army of D to finger looking, you know, sheeple that show up to the ballot box. Biden's awesome because he's not Trump. You know, if we could fight back a little bit by getting more people educated, even on that front, we wind up better.
Yeah, I would add one thing as well for the type of like elections like that would strategically focus on would be like local like school board stuff, because even for people that are just getting into this, having somebody on the inside there that just sees like the crazy stuff that's going on is really good to like create like subversion from like within these institutions, and then like expose like the kind of stuff that people are being taught, because there is like a benefit to having like an inside outside game where you can like show the public like this is where like all this whole vast pit of taxpayer money is going to, and how like your kids are being indoctrinated. And a lot of like I tell people like they should probably focus more on low profile types of elections that no one really talks about, as opposed to like sock puppet politician A or B that's being that's running for office like in like a typical like U.S. House or U.S. Senate race, because a lot of these like local school board elections, that's where people can get not only like political experience but also see what like is actually going on, which is horrific. This stuff is not just like public education. A lot of people treat it like it's like furniture in the background. It's really one of like the biggest. It's like the biggest conveyor belt of like indoctrination that you will see. That out a lot of statist automatons that become loyal servants of this regime, unfortunately. And yeah, I actually do agree that if there is like one issue that I would very likely like put a lot of my efforts towards in terms of affecting some type of change, it'd be the education. Because if you solve that issue and you break the back of that education industrial complex, it's so every other issue that you have to confront becomes much easier to solve.
Well, and like what you said about having someone on the school board or in one of these spots, like it serves, because we're dealing with that. And I'm getting to see that firsthand. We've got an issue in Louisiana where they just tried, and they still haven't given up. They're pretending to give up, but the Louisiana Department of Health, they dropped this bomb on us. I talked about this last week, where K through 12, they're going to put the shot on the schedule for K through 12, and it's going to make it just like all the other stuff that is preventable by these shots, even though clearly it's not. But so, anyway, they're what's that?
I'll let you finish and I'll ask the question afterwards.
All right, so they're going to make it to where like if they have 2 cases over a 2-week period of time, everybody who doesn't have their shots, who isn't up to date, including boosters and whatever else, has to be sent home indefinitely and cannot participate in any extracurricular activities until they have overcome the outbreak. An outbreak is 2 cases, because that's how it is for like measles and chicken pox and whatever, all this other shit. So anyway, so 2 cases of this thing and then they're paying kids $10 every week to go get tested just to be safe. If you want to do it, they'll give you $10 for getting tested, and they're paying the teachers too. So like a kindergartner and a janitor could get it, and my kids have to go home even though they're like a junior and an 8th grader next year. You know, like it's and they can't play basketball, they can't play sports, they can't do any clubs or any of that stuff outside of school either until it goes away and they have 0 cases. So what they did, it was ready to go. The House voted on a bill that would make that impossible, and then the Senate was getting ready to vote on it, and so the governor just pulled it. So now it's not there, so you can't vote on it. And the session ends June 6th. So what the suspicion is that as soon as the session ends, it can't be voted on anymore. They're going to drop the hammer again whenever it's going to be, there's going to be a little case surge or some nonsense like that. And they're going to just come down and drop the hammer again. The only way we found out about a lot of this stuff is because we actually have people on the inside who are like, hey, by the way, yeah, what I'm saying, but at least we have people in there who are like, hey, listen, this is what they're trying to do. You know, this is what you need to do. Call this person, this person, this person, email these people and everything. And even then you're still at the whim of that stuff because for so long we haven't been doing the legwork, and it's never too late to start, but it is a little late. It may not be too late, but it's late, and it's going to take a lot of heavy lifting to undo some of this stuff because they're so well entrenched and we're not.
I mean, my question was only relevant pertaining to the school and the little jibby jabs. Like, is there not necessarily a code regulation to okaying these to being promoted in the schools? Like how we'd have to have like the hepatitis or HPV shot, which was kind of ass backwards. I understand like high school kids could be like sexually active, but like HPV, like, do you really need that kind of shot? Like,
sure, if you're controlling the population.
Yeah, very true, very true. But like, does it not? It's only been, I mean, a credible shot for what, 2 years? Not even a year and a half.
No, a year and a half. I mean, if you want to call it credible, I don't know, but yeah,
I mean, we know it's not. But like,
yeah, but the thing is, it doesn't matter if they say it goes on there. And then they have their little, every time they put their thing out, they tell you about how many kids have gotten it and how many kids have been in the hospital and all this other stuff. It's like, yeah. And of that handful of kids, how many of those kids like in the kind of shape my kids are in, playing sports and doing all that?
True.
And how many
Absolutely
of them were
true.
like, how many of them were
sit down and play Minecraft all day?
Yeah. So I don't know. It's just, and even then it's still, what's funny about it is, here's what's going to happen. You're going to have some kid who got his shots, get paid to go get tested. He's going to pop positive, and my kid who doesn't have shots and is completely healthy is going to get sent home. But so let me turn that into a question for you, Jose. Like, what do you is that kind of what you were talking about with like having people on these things that at the very least you get some sort of a heads up as to what shenanigans these people are trying?
Yes, and I'd even go further that people that are averse to say like electoral politics, whether it's like state level or like local level, there's a case to be made that if you're pursuing like a career in education and you end up like being a bureaucrat, your labor is still like valuable because if you still see what's going on the inside, and you could potentially even throw wrenches on the inside as well. And there's a lot of ways you could like skin this cat. And also I would add that a lot of like local investigative journalism that people can do as like a hobby can go a long way in terms of doing stuff, because there is a dearth of a lot of, in my time doing politics, I've seen like a dearth of a lot of like local activism because of the just general obsession with federal politics, which is really a product of like how centralized like the U.S. federal government has become. That's made that where there's a lot of pressure points that we can put on the political establishment locally and all that, kind of create our own little local power bases. But there is a lot of value. A case could be made that actually a person that's able to get a position on like a local school board could be in a stronger position to affect political change than say a like libertarian Republican in Congress that's good on education policy, because the latter guy is just going to be like one out of like 435 reps that are going to be overwhelmingly statist and not have much power. Whereas the person at the local education board could potentially, if they find a bunch of controversial information, could build a story that's not only like a local story that would get a lot of attention, but also potentially a national and change a conversation there. There's a lot of value. And with a lot of the critical race theory stuff, it's you've seen that play out where a lot of these activists that are not only getting involved in like school boards, but they're also able to talk to a lot of teachers and other employees and concerned parents about like what's being taught in these schools. That's why like the least sexy political type of positions and opportunities tend to actually be like the higher yield, whereas the stuff that everybody's talking about on the media, from like your US like House member to like the Senate, that kind of stuff generally doesn't have like much of an impact in like the rare chance that you get like somebody that's like good elected, because they're just going to be surrounded in like a sea of statism.
Sure. And I've thought about doing something like that myself. I've thought about, you know, because I think about a lot of shit, but I thought about running as either a Democrat or a Republican, because I'm not running to lose. So I'm not going to run as a Green Party or a Libertarian, because I kind of like to win if I'm going to spend money to do it. So I thought that I would run as a, like in the GOP or as a Democrat, but run as an anarchist for my local town council. And what I thought about was that my logo or whatever would say Indianapolis and DC can suck my balls, and have the A and balls be an anarchy symbol. And and I mean, imagine people with that.
You said you want to win, right?
Right. Well, I want a chance to win, and you can, but because, you know, they're never going to let any of these third parties win. So a chance to win, and you can say that you know you won't win, you know, even if you run as a Republican or a Democrat. Well, for one, we're talking about our local community, and people will find it funny to vote for the guy that said Indianapolis and DC can suck my balls. And number two, there is the case of Aria DiMezzo in New Hampshire, who ran as a transsexual Satanist anarchist and won for sheriff. So, so it is possible to do that kind of thing.
Saying there's a chance.
I'm saying there's a chance.
Yeah. Even in a lot of local elections, depending on like the state or municipality you're in, some of them are like nonpartisan, so it becomes more issue focused and candidate focused. It's no longer about like the labels, but yeah, there is like an off chance. It does require it's a skill in of itself, like running a campaign, and all that. That stuff, it can be pretty tedious. But if you do like the homework and you're in an area where you have been able to like identify like an issue that people rally around, you could go a long way.
Sure, and I have those skills. You know what I'm saying. I'm probably not going to do that, but to encourage other people, because I'd be an asshole. I'd be out there doing all kinds of nonsense. But
Indianapolis and Washington D.C., come suck the balls of this asshole.
Right, exactly.
Pause.
Look, right, for sure. Lots of pause.
There,
but in reality, I do think that you're onto something, and I think that is a way to at least get some kind of influence, even if you're an anarchist, even if you're me and you're just making fun of them. You know, look at the traction in the Libertarian Party that Vermin Supreme got just to make fun of folks. And so I think that you're right, that you could enact some changes. The issue that we're going to have is not everybody has my kind of experience. Like I said, I was the press secretary for one of the people running for president for the Libertarian Party. So I have experience knowing what that is. I have a media list right now for Indianapolis or for Indiana. I have all of the media. I know everybody that I would need to talk to, but not everybody has those kinds of resources. How do they get them? What's your advice?
This is kind of like the importance of having groups of people that you're able to identify that show kind of like skills or like the potential for skills. Because if you go like the lone wolf route and don't really try to pass on your skills, that stuff will die like with you. And there's a lot of organizations in my experience that were able to do a lot of good stuff like in the short term and even like medium term, but once like their core leaders like moved on or like retired or whatever, they just die out. And you have to be thinking like kind of like 2 to 3 steps ahead, where once you've acquired like certain skills and you're like a proven commodity at your field, you want to find like a successor, or at least like somebody that is like that you can partner with to continue passing that on, because you have to think multi-generationally. That's how, honestly, a lot of these like statist establishment, like globalist organizations work, these roundtable groups. Like they not only have like a leadership cadre, but they have like constant like recruitment programs that have like create like pipelines for people. It's like a total like assembly line of like statists, where like the Rockefeller Foundation can always, like right now, could count on like in 2050 having a whole like set of like new recruits and all that, that'll assume like leadership and dictate public policy. In many regards, it may benefit a lot of libertarians or any people like political dissidents to study a lot of these foundations and see what they do, find out what works and what doesn't, and kind of apply it to your organization, because there are some proven models of building political organizations that are kind of like that work regardless of like the ideology of that organization, and you just have to identify best practices and cut out like bad practices.
Cool. Yeah,
no,
and,
that's fascinating, actually. Like that.
Sure.
I don't think there's a lot of people who are like, so many people, because it's so easy in the media cycle to get caught up in the, well, we got to go fight critical race theory. We got to go fight this. And like the generational folks that you're talking about, they're already laying the groundwork for the next 10 issues that we haven't even heard about yet. And if we're not thinking like that, if you're not thinking the way that the enemy thinks, I'm not saying you have to act like they act and have the morals that they have, but you can look at their blueprint for how they get their shit done and learn from it.
Yeah, Rothbard did that as well. He suggested that libertarians look at what the socialists did, because they've been very successful at taking over both of the political parties in this country. You can say whatever you want about the Republicans and conservatives; they're just socialism light. It's basically, do you want Stalin or Lenin? And in that choice, Lenin is certainly better than Stalin, but it's Lenin.
Yeah, the conservative movement, I've been involved in a lot of that stuff, and I've written at length about just how screwed up it is, but they do have some successful models when it comes to how institutionalized it is, and certain organizations can actually learn from it, because they're successful for a reason. They have like pretty vast networks, they have really big donors and all of that, but yeah, you do. It does like behoove our movements to look at a lot of the successful like insurgent movements as well. Like say like the Squad, really like the progressive movements in the Democratic Party as well. Like a lot of these other movements that were generally on the fringes, like in the 90s or whatever, but now are becoming more mainstream. Those are case studies to look at. You want to look at as many on the across the political spectrum to see if you could recognize patterns, because once you recognize patterns, then you can try to replicate it to like the context that you want to. But I think the big thing about trying to fill in the knowledge gap, Marcus, that you were talking about with people, is you're going to have to find other people that are not only on like the same wavelength, but they have to demonstrate some like aptitude, like they're like ready to put in the work, put in the hours, and then just train them up on that. Because you don't want like for me, I have like my own newsletter, which I try to share with people and promote, because I don't want this like knowledge to only just be confined to like myself. Like it should be, I want it to go out to as many people as possible so that they can set up their own organizations and institutionalize that, and then pass on their information to like future leaders.
For sure. See, we got that.
Yeah, sign up for his newsletter. It's in our in the description. So
sure. But we got that, man. We got this coalition called Aquarian Anarchy, but popping off right in this motherfucker right now. We're gonna bring folks here, and like yourself, and we're gonna say, okay, if Jose wants to run for some shit, he's one of our people. We're definitely gonna do some stuff for him, and we're gonna provide that, because I think that supporting people like yourself, and frankly anybody that is challenging the statist agenda, and I'm not talking about, one of the things that libertarians get caught up in is, if you're not 100% where I'm at, then fuck it. I'm like, if you're 51% on my side, you're on my side. So to come together.
Yeah, purity spiraling can definitely derail movements like much more than even like external enemies and all that. But yeah, that's why like, I tend to focus on like several like key issues, and if there's like disagreements, I just keep it moving, and then like if we agree, we just focus on that. That's why I tend to be more like single issue. But yeah, that is like a challenge when you're getting into like broader political movements. But one thing I have told I have like mentioned though is that if you're able to build successful single issue networks, you can effectively synergize long term if people hit the right buttons, and then you could build even broader coalitions. But you have to kind of like start out like simple and then like build up. And
not trying to do everything at once.
Yeah,
Right.
but yeah, like that's the key. And a lot of times with politics, simpler tends to be better when it comes to doing stuff, because if you try to do all sorts of like cartwheels and like fancy gymnastics, you'll just end up getting burnt out. And I experienced that when I first got in, like through like the Ron Paul movement and all that, trying to take on a bunch of issues, and then just realize let's like just use laser focus on like maybe like 1 to 2 to 3 issues. And yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, well that's one of the things we see in like the Libertarian Party, is that because there's so many issues that it makes it harder. I think the Ron Paul thing was like he was so far and away better than any of the other candidates that it was easy for people to put their differences aside momentarily to just pour all their energy into that. But yeah, when you get into like single issue type stuff, you tend to be able to build a stronger coalition because everybody can put other stuff out and they don't even really talk about it. It doesn't even come up. Nobody cares about what your thoughts are on the drug war or on abortion or federal intervention. Whatever, U.S. intervention in foreign wars. If you're fighting to stop the vaccine mandates, like if all you're trying to do is that, then you get all these people from all over and they put everything else aside because that's their issue and they want to stick together on that. And you don't have to have this thing where it's like, oh, wait a second, you're not for completely open borders. Like, okay, then you're not really one of us, and get the hell out of here. And everybody wants to like string people up because they don't agree on every single issue. So in a lot of ways, it can be stronger building in that way.
Yeah, I could allude to the Ron Paul's like first Republican run. He was able through his emphasis on like the laser focus on like ending the wars and also like the Fed. He was able to cobble together an interesting coalition of people, like not just like on the ostensive right or like libertarian, but also a lot of like dissident leftists and some like really disaffected progressives. And fast forward to the vaccine mandates, some leftist writers that I cite in some of the articles I do are actually were very strong opponents of like the vaccine mandates, and these type of single issues can bring about like transpartisan synergy that you don't see in conventional politics. That's why I tend to like single issue stuff more than conventional electoral politics and electioneering in general. It's elections, like for me, are just part of like the single issue lobbying process, but it's not the alpha or the omega. It's like only like one aspect of it. And yeah, and that's one thing that in this era of polarization, that like the media and a lot of party officials and the pundit class tries to gin up, is that to avoid a lot of this stuff and like wasting your time in pointless political ventures, it's just easier to find an issue that you're passionate about and try to identify people, not just like in your political party, but also across the political spectrum that agree with you, and see what you guys can do like together. It's much more productive.
For sure. Yeah, and I think another component, because I think you're largely right, but I think another component that we do need to be better at is I read recently a book on Thomas Paine that was from a left-wing kind of perspective, honoring him, but from a left-wing perspective. And what I gleaned from that book was that that what Thomas Paine had, because if people don't know that Thomas Paine certainly is the reason we have in America, that's a fact. Both Washington and John Adams, John Adams credited Paine with the victory over Britain, and so what Paine was good at was getting to the common man, was propaganda. What we need is better propaganda, and by propaganda, I'm just meaning political thought for a purpose. That real simple definition. We need
just do the Bernays term for it. Call it PR.
Right, for sure. Right. We need better propaganda or better PR, and we need to stop arguing amongst ourselves publicly. Yes, there are different GOP members or different Democrats that disagree about this or that, but generally they do most of their arguing behind closed doors. Libertarians and anarchists and anybody on the freedom bent tends to throw all their shit out on Twitter or on Facebook or wherever and yell at each other forever. We need to stop doing that, and we need to start to focus on the shit that people care about. People don't want their kids to die. People don't, which is what happens in war. People don't want their money drained away, which is what the Fed does. So again, from the beginning of this interview, stop the wars in the Fed. It is a very simple formula that goes for, because if you do those two things, if those two things go away, a lot of the other issues are going to follow suit. But would you agree that we need to get better at messaging?
Yes, there's a really strong case that if you want to have like a successful political movement, you have to have like a really good like propaganda, like an aesthetic to it, because it's what's going to appeal to like common man. Like even like you look at like the Soviet Union, they had like that Soviet realism art and all that, like as horrific as the Soviet Union was, but it like appealed to like a lot of people, a lot of collectivist movements. They have like really powerful aesthetics. And one thing I do think I've noticed over the years with some like libertarian organizations, they have been able to get like some kind of like memes out and all that. But obviously you have to like have it. You can't just use logic, because not everybody's gonna fully buy into a political cause based on logic. A lot of people are very emotional, and you have to like kind of craft your message to whatever audience you're targeting. It has to be pretty multifaceted. And yeah, you do have to have like PR. I'm not a PR expert, but it is something that I do agree with, that you do have to have like a propaganda. It might be like a loaded term, but it is like, I think propaganda is value neutral. Ultimately, it's a tool.
Sure. So before that, because we have you for an hour, before we let you go, where's your heart at, man? What kind of religion, just to take it a totally different direction, where's your heart? How do you see God interplaying into this? Because for us, we see this as not only a political fight and a fight for freedom, but a genuine fight for the soul of humanity. We believe that through freedom, you get to compassion and love and peace. And that's where we're trying to get. And that's the goal that God has given, at least me, and I believe Chad and Nicco. Where's your heart with that kind of stuff?
Well, I was raised Catholic, and I'll admit I'm not exactly the most like devout Catholic, but I think that still having like believing like in a higher being gives you like a sense of purpose, and also of like calm of knowing that we're like on this rock for a limited amount of time, and we need to make the most out of it. And I like to have I also just like reading about religion in general. So for me, it's like the work I do is to basically like serve like future generations, because I want to leave this world like better off for like people to for like my posterity to like enjoy. Like that's one of like the things I believe that is kind of messed up about our present political order, that it's like very short term and like high time preference focus, and not really centered on trying to build like a better tomorrow for like your children and stuff like that. That's kind of like the purpose of like civilization at its core.
Question: do you have any kids?
Rule. What?
Do you have any kids?
Oh no, I don't. Not right now.
Cool.
Would you plan to have any in this crazy ass world?
Nice. So, do you guys have any more questions for Jose?
I wish I had more questions in general. I'm sorry, Jose. Look, when politics get to talking, if it's not like in the layman's, like Negroes, like very simple terms, I'm just this shit flies over my head. And I'm like, no, we're using big words. Okay, it's not even a big word. I can look it up at any moment in time, but it's just, so I'm super sorry, boss man. I appreciate the knowledge that you dropped, and I'm sorry I went black screen, not black face. I've been born black, but the thing is, thank you very much for popping up on the show and giving us some wisdom.
No, I really enjoyed it, guys. Yeah, it was a blast.
So I have one question before we go. So you wrote this book. So I want to remind everybody else, because I think we had the link to this book. I couldn't find your link for this book. I don't know if you still have a link for it or whatever, but if you could send it to me, and I'll put it in the description for the folks who watch the replay or whatever. But so this is the 10 Myths of Gun Control. That one's in the description. But you also wrote this one, Jose, How Socialism Destroyed Venezuela and Why the U.S. Should Stay Out. And I wanted to say that because, like, I want you to, like, from that perspective of seeing, your I don't know, your the land of your ancestors and everything, like, done dirty like it has been for this, interventionist manipulation. And then what we're seeing with this other thing that's going on right now, where NATO is involved and there's a blue and yellow flag and some other stuff. I'm not going to say any like buzzwords that get channels banned, but you know what I'm talking about. Like, what do you see as like some of the parallels of like how like narratives are built around this stuff, and like who the bad guys are and who the good guys are, and who may be actually benefiting from all this stuff, and like how, we just dropped another 40 ball on them last week. $40 billion. How do you see
on the same day they didn't, just to add
right,
this back, on the same day they denied 48 million to help people who are starving?
How do you see this and that, kind of paralleled?
So I am definitely an avid follower of geopolitics, and I tend to look at the way these type of international struggles play out in a objective manner. So with regards to Venezuela, in this book, in summary, I talk about Venezuela's collapse as a multi-decade process that's been going on since the 1970s, since the government there nationalized its oil sector, and then it embraced all sorts of economic interventionist measures that were doubled down upon by Hugo Chavez when he came into power in the late 90s. And but now this in Venezuela, this issue here has gotten geopolitical because Venezuela is technically part of the so-called Legion of Doom axis of China, Russia, and other Eurasian countries. Because we are seeing now a bifurcation of the international system where you have kind of like the Anglo-American type of like empire and NATO and like the collective West of like those countries squaring off against the emerging Eurasian powers that are spearheaded by China, Russia. And what you're seeing over in Eastern Europe right now is just one theater of what I believe is like going to be like the new conflict system of like the 21st century. Because with the collapse of the Soviet Union, you had like unipolarity where it was like only like the US as like the top dog. But then with the rise of Russia, as noted by its intervention in Georgia in 2008, and then in Ukraine in 2014, and in the present, and then China as well, the system's changing. There's now it's kind of reverting to like a kind of like 19th century style like geopolitics, where you have a lot of great powers emerging, but against the backdrop of like 21st century technology, culture, and all that. So it's bad all around for the U.S. because, as Marcus mentioned, this is just another pretext to dump a bunch of money into basically a conflict theater that is like a Slav on Slav type of like violence. And like, contrary to popular belief, one of those governments is not like a liberal democracy like people in the bobblehead media would like you to believe. and they want to just spend a bunch of money while the rest of the country has to suffer like from inflation, all that. And it just goes to show that the ruling class in like DC cares more about serving like the military industrial complex, this whole consortium of NGOs and people that are just causing trouble abroad and totally ignoring the country when its infrastructure is crumbling. You have baby formula shortages, inflation out the wazoo, and just a social breakdown. And yeah, pretty bad stuff that lies ahead.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think we could probably dig into all that for days.
Well, no, I get Jose's newsletter and everything. So I knew he goes into a lot of this stuff a lot, and so I wanted to kind of like
we could talk about that in another episode about like the geopolitics, because that's a whole other can of worms.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
I just wanted to scratch the surface and let you just kind of like I don't know, pick at that wound and let some pus drip out for a second. So
for sure.
there we go.
I have to choose a disgusting analogy to put.
Because it's an analogy fitting of the situation. That's why.
Sure.
Yes.
It's an analogy fitting for the situation.
With the geopolitics, I do want to make one quick comment, and then we'll get to going. One of the things that, though I do agree that China and Russia certainly are worse, if you will, than the United States is. There's no question that they're farther down the tyranny road than the United States is, and don't let them use that as an excuse to take us there too. And so what we need to do is, like Jose has talked about, we need to start coming together, and we need to find out what our local community needs and begin filling those roles with people that aren't complete and total shitbags. So I on the local level, I do think that there is some value to getting involved in what your community is. And Jose, if anyone has any questions, is there anything you would like to plug before you go?
Yeah, if you want to follow my content, check out my Substack, Jose Niño Unfiltered. That's where I generally talk about current political affairs, and then I drop some wisdom about how to like solve some of these problems. But for political strategy, you have to go to my newsletter, the Niño File, which you can find on Patreon or Subscribestar. That's where I go into like stuff about identifying single issues, identifying good candidates, and how to like build organizations. That's more like the nitty gritty.
Awesome.
All of those links are down below. So I have the one. It's
I just subscribe most definitely to that newsletter.
The JOS BCF Substack.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So I've got that one, and then I've got your Subscribestar link as well, and I also have the link to this book right here. And if you have, like I said, if you have a link for the Venezuela book, I can put that one in there.
I'll find out actually right now, because I had to change up some of my stuff on Gumroad actually.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, no worries. But yeah, no, this has been really good. Like y'all don't know this, but like Jose ain't even like 30 years old yet. Like, are you even 25 yet? Like,
I'm 31 actually.
Oh, are you? Oh, see, I did. Okay, so when I met you, you weren't 30 yet. That's what it was. Like you were just okay, but still, like
Right.
Y'all heard the gem this dude was dropping. Like he's talking like a
politician,
65-year-old who's been through the wars, and knows his shit. But like this is what we need. We need to cultivate folks like Jose, who do the work and give some respect, show some love to their work that they're doing, because he's putting in a lot of effort and a lot of time into researching this stuff and really like digging in and using. I mean, you're a sharp dude too. That's the thing that I really like about you and what you bring to the table, is that you aren't just one of these standard talking heads. You actually like look into this stuff in a way that I think gives like some hope to finding a way, either through like some of the stuff that we've talked about, where it's rendering it obsolete by doing your own stuff, but just kind of having an awareness of what is there so you can avoid it. But then also, if you have to, sometimes you got to dig into the belly of the beast and rip the guts out so that you can live to fight another day, because it's like we're dealing with this shit here in Louisiana. Like my choices, if this thing goes through, my choices are like, I don't know, start my own pure blood sports league for my boys to play in and homeschool them from that point on, or move to another state. Neither of which is like a terribly attractive option. And this just kind of got, thrusted on us in of like, we were minding our own business, and I appreciate what you brought to the table in letting everybody know that sometimes merely minding your own business when the enemy is out there, undermining the foundation of your house in the middle of the night, at some point you got to kind of pay attention. Otherwise they're gonna wipe you out. So
right on. Well, again, Jose, really appreciate you joining us tonight, and it's been a great conversation. I didn't know a whole lot about you before you came on. I had seen you. I think I followed you for some time on Twitter, but really nice perspective. You just really nailed a lot of the similar ideas to personally where I think. So I think you're right, because I'm right about everything, but but I think you're right about a lot of stuff. And again, I wish you the best of luck. Anything we can do to help, let us know. And again, for everybody, go down to where Chad was talking about and get those links, support what he's doing. And Chad, you ready?
Yeah. Well, hang on. No, I'm not, because I'm actually adding the
really
link down here to the bottom. So yeah,
Cool.
he just sent the link, and while we were in here, I wanted to actually update it. So give me just a second. Let me save it. What? I'm not trying to change the broadcast time.
See, yep, sure.
Damn it.
Fucking white guys. I'll tell you what.
What did I do?
I didn't say
That white
that.
privilege.
I didn't say
Dude.
that.
All right. I got to bounce, but it's nice chatting.
All right, well,
all right.
And thank you so much.
I'm gonna add it later. I'm gonna keep it copied here, and I'll add it later. But I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much, and y'all have a great evening. Everybody have a great week, and as always, what do we do, Marcus?
Stay free.